get back to our friend here tonight. Cate Montana is our guest. Her website, unearthingvenus.com and catemontana.com. Cate, it's a lot of fun talking to you about a lot of different things, especially your book.
A lot of different things.
The electric car, something that you bringing it up, tying it all in with going green and nature and the ecosystem and clean air. We had Dr. Brooks Agnew on the show last year, and he has a company that has some very affordable electric cars, starting in the $16,000 to $18,000 range. And we had him on for Agnew Brooks is his name. We had Dr. Brooks on for a full 2 hours, and he's got a full production facility that's building these cars out. They've been approved. They've been tested for the roads. But the reason we still don't see any on the roads today, and I said, well, what's the biggest hurdle? Why can't, is it the battery life, the charge time? And he said to me, no, Pat, what it comes down to is one thing. How are they going to charge road tax when you're not pulling up to a pump and putting 48 cents of your gas fuel money into the roads and highways?
Oh, boy. Well, there you go.
Exactly. Exactly. And he said that's going to be the biggest fight for the cars that are coming out, the new electric cars. I know there's hybrids and stuff out, but for the true, that's going to be the affordable electric cars that people will buy. They still haven't worked that out, because you're not going to be pulling up to the fuel pump and paying for highway excise tax and the local tax for the roads and stuff. That right there is the big clincher.
They're going to have to figure out a whole different way to finance and keep. Exactly.
Right.
It comes down to economics and what a nut to crack.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, the whole Armageddon sort of orientation of, well, let's just level the whole damn playing field and start over. It's just like, well, I don't want to have to go through that painful place, and I don't want to have the rest of the world go through that painful place for us to kind of get some sense knocked into our heads. But it comes down to who wants to feather their nest and it's just so easy to keep the status quo going. Right. Or maybe it's hard to keep the status quo going, but it's the only thing we know. And the unknown is a frightening thing to most people.
I would agree.
So, what I've come down to, bottom line, Pat, is that what we're really talking about is a restructuring of our value systems. You asked me earlier what was it about the tribes that made them different and got them to where they are, and the first part of the story is I think that they're not separate from nature. They're not overly, they're still very humble about their participation in this creation. But I think what it does boil down to is they have a different value structure. They value the yang, masculine aspects of, yes, get out there and be aggressive and go for it and, do what you're going to do. But they also value equally the feminine orientation, which goes, well, let's not cut any more trees. We're in a drought. We're not going to have any more babies for the next few years until the drought's over and we're more in harmony with nature. So, kind of like, chill out, guys. Take time off. Don't cut down any more trees. We don't need any more huts and la, 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 la.
Right.
So there's this orientation that's very holistic, that's very grounded in the earth, and that it's a different kind of a value system. And that's what I woke up to after all the shouting was done in my life, after that interview. It's just like, I kept asking myself, what was the power of the women to tell the men to stop? I kept wondering about that. What made the women so freaking powerful? Well, I kind of ignored the whole fact that it was a consensus on a whole cultural level between the men and the women. There was an agreement and an understanding about human nature that was so comprehensive and so obvious to them that it never occurred to them. It was like, how can you mess with nature? This is how men are, this is how women are, and for the good of the whole, including the earth and our environment, for everything to be balanced and healthy, we're going to work together.
Right.
How the hell we've ever gotten away from that? Well, I could go down the patriarchal Abrahamic religion, fundamentalist religion foundation of Islam and Judaism and Christianity, and that's a whole different that's a huge conversation, because that's where patriarchy started to rise, was 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, with the rise and the introduction of drum roll, the alphabet. When the alphabet was introduced, there's a Dr. Leonard Shlain, I think he's an anthropologist, I may be wrong on that, and he wrote a fascinating book called The Alphabet versus the Goddess. And his whole supposition about how we went from, 5,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, we basically changed the sex of God. I mean, think about it. We went for thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years with a feminine deity called the goddess, pretty much at the helm of things. Yes, we had Zeus and all that, but nobody ever argued that the kind of the whole creative foundation was based around the feminine. And then all of a sudden we have a gender switch. And it's like, what happened? Well, historically, the thing is a whole bunch of Mongolian hordes swept down with their horses from the Northland and slaughtered and hacked and killed, and they were masculine, sky god-oriented beings, and so then everybody all of a sudden was oriented toward the masculine, which really doesn't fly when you stop to think about it, because historically when conquering nations come in and conquer, they have a tendency to absorb the current culture, and it's a blending. It's not just a takeover culturally or religiously. So anyway, so this Dr. Shlain came along and go, well, guess what happened 5,000 years ago? We introduced reading and writing, which is completely left brain. And the left brain is linear logic. And, of course, writing is very linear, left to right, back to right. It's just one letter after the next letter, after the next word, after the next paragraph. So it's really fascinating. Through his whole book, he looks at the rise of literacy is mirrored exactly by the fall of the goddess religions and the power of the feminine. And if you look through history, when the Dark Ages came upon us, you would have thought that women would have been even worse off. But in Europe during the Dark Ages, literacy fell to an all-time low of about around 1%, okay? Right. But what happened, we come out of the Dark Ages of Europe, what do we have? We have a rise in the belief and the trust and the love for the feminine. There's the bards, and there's the romantic period, and the ladies, and the whole romantic area of the feminine. And then by the time we hit the 1500s and we get the Gutenberg press is invented, guess what happened after the printing press was invented?
People start reading about things.
People started reading, a really upsurge in left brain masculine thinking. And the next thing we have on the historical scale is the witch hunts and the Inquisition.
Right.
So it's a really fascinating theory that Shlain came up with, that the more the left brain dominance came into prominence, that's when we changed the sex of God from feminine to masculine. Because it was the great rise of the left brain and linear, logical, structured, scientific thought. And that's the beautiful realm of the masculine. I hate using the words feminine and masculine, because I say the words feminine and masculine, we think men and women and penises and vaginas and sexuality and all that. But this so far transcends just the physical orientation of man and woman. These are qualitative gifts that both genders bring to the table. And God knows that the masculine, I mean, there are a lot of women who have a lot more left brain, structured, organized thinking, processing going on than a lot of men.
Very
a lot
true.
of men are much more holistic and intuitive than a lot of women. So it's like the masculine and feminine qualities are not like, well, all men are this way and all women are that way. It's like, no. Every human being is a blend of both masculine and feminine qualities. That's called balance.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So I think, so what I finally woke up to, and I'm taking a long, circuitous, historical journey to get back to the question you asked me about why did that other tribe work so well. Yes, they're based in nature. No, they are not a highly literate culture, so they're not a highly left-brain culture. But they're balanced. We have gone way out of balance into a logical, intellectual functioning, and we've raised that as the pinnacle of creation. And we've made God into a he, and we've made the almighty dollar next to God,
Right.
if not surpassing God, and about materialism and about having and doing, do right over the cliff.
I got a quick question for you. This
Yes.
is a zinger, and then I've got a couple questions that some listeners sent in.
Yeah.
What do you think about when we talk about the male and the female and everything we've discussed here this morning, everything you've discussed? What do you think about someone like Angelina Jolie, who was out getting convenient hysterectomies?
Mm-hmm. And mastectomies.
What do you think about women that are doing this today for the sake of convenience? Is kind of what I'm hearing. Not about even health, just convenience.
Well, it's pretty scary.
I think so.
I think we're very divorced from our bodies. We're divorced from nature as a culture. We're divorced more and more from our bodies, more and more. I think the more we're in our heads, the more we just absorb our culture's ideas and information. We are in this massive information glut, which again is pretty left brain. And so I think we form these ideas about how and who and what we're supposed to be and what is healthy or what is smart or what is trendy. I can't imagine that a mastectomy would be trendy, but we've made the birth process into a disease and have elevated cesarean. I mean, I think I don't even know. It's a huge percentage of births now are done by cesarean section. So you can schedule it. So you can schedule the birth of your child. And so we've really divorced ourselves from natural processes. And again, this is not finger pointing toward men when I say we live in a masculinized culture that's very much in its head. But we live in that linear logical world, and we've elevated that to deity status. And I think what we've lost track of, especially as women, is we've lost track of our bodies and our sense of connectedness through our bodies and through our emotions. And women have had to walk into the cultural playing field of the masculine and operate through that paradigm, through those qualities, through those characteristics. We've had to man up because it's the only game in town.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with the game. But when you're out of balance, it's just like, left brain, right brain. You're familiar with that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's like, imagine the left brain, right brain is like a boat, and we're all on the ocean together, and we're all born with left brain and right brain characteristics and capacities. But all of a sudden, the left brain is all that matters. It's all that's considered valid. Okay? And everybody, including the right brain people, have to run to the left side of the boat. What happens to the boat?
Tips over.
Yeah, it tips over. It's not about one way and one mode of being better than the other. It's about balance and the necessity for both. And what we've really lost track of, and this goes right back to Angelina Jolie, bless her heart, to be so divorced from one's body and whatever that natural life force that pumps through our veins, that keeps us in these bodies, and that gives us the opportunity to walk and talk and chew gum and touch and make love and laugh and get stressed and have all these experiences that we have. I think we're so out of touch with that life force in us and in our connection to the world and nature that, we depend on all of these ideas. We're turning life into a concept instead of an experience. And so, yes, remove your breast and remove your, and if you have this DNA profile, then you have to have a hysterectomy in your 30s or whatever the rules are. It's just like there are perhaps other ways of operating and being that are much more aligned with a more holistic, healthy, balanced, ecstatic way of being.
Right, not being so, like you said, not so radical about things.
Really,
being a little bit more, not take that radical approach. Be a little bit more down the middle, but be a little, use a little logic, and a little bit of smarts.
Well, and use a little bit of heart.
Right.
Take that time to, the doing values we've got down really well. We know how to do. We don't know how to take a deep breath and just let it, just chill out and be for a while. And that's a more passive, meditative, relaxed, receptive state. And it takes the balance of that receptivity. Any creative artist knows that you can't just freaking paint all day, all night, Marianne. You can't just write. You can't just, do whatever the creative process. You have to have time you have to have downtime. You have to have reflective time. You have to have that being just receptive, just whoa, okay? And that's the other side. That's the feminine side of creation. And that's it's fascinating, Pat, that the masculine is since time immemorial has been associated with the light, okay, which is also associated with the light of consciousness. It's about abstract thinking. It's about the abstract. And the feminine has, in the yin and yang Chinese Taoist system, the yang is light, okay? The yin is darkness. And so if you've got a very highly masculinized structure equals law. If you have a very hidebound, structured, organized, this is what is right and everything else, this is how things are. This is how God made the world, or this is how evolution happened, whatever. If that's all you've got operating, you're missing that intuitive function that any creative scientist or anything else will say is equally important for the juice to flow, for maximum potential as a human being. And we've got this masculine, structured, religious, political, governmental lockdown system that is very frightened of the dark feminine, the darkness, the chaos of before the light. And it's just like, oh, God, no. Hi, you can't have the light without the dark. You can't have feminine without the masculine and vice versa. You can't have a head without a heart. A heart does horribly as a function without a body with a head. And equally, the head doesn't function very well in a body without a heart. You got to have both. But we have so far run to that left side of the boat that, we're tipping over, and we think that there's only one way to operate and only one paradigm and only one set of values that we value having material things and doing material things and being right and being perfect. And we've got all these rules. And I think we're choking the life force out of ourselves, Pat.
I agree with you. Let me go ahead and post a couple questions to you.
Yeah.
Our friend Durhuff on the East Coast writes in and says, Cate, how do you feel about how men relied on women during World War II? How mainly men had to realize that they couldn't get the horror done by themselves. Even Hitler relented and gave in to his well, this is a big word he's using, abhorrence of women in his workforce.
Hitler had an abhorrence of women in his workforce?
Yeah, I mean, he ended up hiring women but didn't want to. I mean, just what's your thoughts on that?
I'm really not familiar with Hitler's mindset on the feminine, I must admit.
Okay. Well, how about let's not worry about Hitler. How about just in general with women in the war and wartime?
I think it was very hard for men to come home from the war to, the women had stepped in, the Rosie the Riveter, to keep the country functioning, to keep the war machine functioning, to keep industry functioning. Women had to step into those roles because of the sheer absence of men. I think it was very hard for men. They left with the little woman in the home with the kids, and then they went and were traumatized on the freaking battlefield and were set, yet one more time at one another's throats through some abstract thing called politics and, this is, and boundaries and political territory, and then have to kill each other and go through the trauma of war and then come back and realize that the women had stepped into their positions and and were doing quite well with it. I think that was I think that was an enormously hard time, a passage for men to go through. And I think to a great degree, both sexes are reeling right now through this whole shakedown cruise that we've been doing for the last 60 years, trying to figure out how we can optimally operate as human beings, not just men and women, but as human beings. And I think we spend, it's really bizarre, Pat. Here I am talking about gender roles and masculine and feminine, and, I keep saying the words masculine and feminine over and over. But truth of the matter is, I think the most important thing is that we start realizing that we far transcend just gender roles, that we are human beings. We have all of these capacities and potentials and these yin and yang qualities that I keep talking about, that are patterns of creation, and that we're much larger than what we've allowed ourselves to be. And so I think a lot of the socio-political struggle that has shown up on the map, like as you say, how did the men feel when they came back from the war, and that was the case. It's been very, very difficult because men have been set up. They've been set up. You have to be, the whole John Wayne complex. You have to be this way. You have to be strong. You have to be the protector. You have to be the provider. You have to be this, that, and the other. There's a mold that men have been put in for thousands of years. And it's got to be really crappy to constantly have to be the warrior and to hack and slaughter and be killed and maimed, and it's just like, what a horrible role to go through. Well, equally horrible and traumatizing is to be the little woman at home still locked up in either the dungeon or the tower or in the suburbs or whatever gender roles. You can only be a secretary or you can only be a prostitute or a teacher. We have inflicted such trauma on one another, and I think that so much of it, I'm gonna say the R word. I think so much of the trauma comes from our religious backgrounds and all of these expectations about roles and perfection and God outside and this kind of we've been pitted against one another. And if you want to go into conspiracy theories, in some respects, I think religion and politics is one just long, massive conspiracy to keep human beings at each other's throats, divided against one another, instead of being able to work together in a harmonious fashion to actually fashion a world that works for everyone.
Right.
We've got the resources to feed the whole entire world if we could just get off the the bandwagon and the payroll of the military-industrial complex and start using the rest of the shifting part of the personnel to the right side of the boat and going, oh, wow, heart and compassion and caring and concern for the other person and for other communities and for other nations and other peoples is just as important as profit. Right.
Well, and the one thing, if you want to talk if you want to talk conspiracies, if you want to talk fringy stuff, the one thing that we talk about here in this program is about people being open-minded on things, and that's why you're here tonight. It's about people being open-minded, letting people listen. And, whether we talk about ufology or paranormal research or cryptozoology or whatever it may be, people are being more and more open-minded, and people are starting to question things. They're just not falling into line. Like you said, you were growing up. You grew up in a certain type of lifestyle. You got into the television and the radio business when it was at its prime, when it was the glory days of it, if you will. I mean, when that
Truly.
was, this, like you said, it was like Hollywood. Now it's all getting redefined. But people, even with religion, are constantly, I think a lot of people are reevaluating things, and they're questioning things. People are taking a little different. They'll pick up the Bible and they take a little bit different look. I grew up in the Catholic. My mom is 92 years old. She's a devout Italian Catholic. You're just not going to change her way of thinking. She's 92 years old. She's going to go to her grave with the way she thinks about things.
Absolutely.
But when I look back at my life, when I went to a Catholic grammar school, Catholic high school, and when we talked about religion and the Catholic religion, it was kind of like, here is they'd read through a book on religious history or the Bible and say, okay, da 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 da. Now here's what it means. Da 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 da. Now here's what it means. That's all you would constantly hear, and you just kind of took a lot of that stuff for granted, if you will. It's like, well, this is the way it's supposed to be. But I think people are now picking up that Bible, they're going through it, and they're rereading it for themselves, and they're saying, maybe that's not what it really means. Maybe it really means this. Maybe it means that there's a little bit more to that big word of God. Maybe there is a little bit more to that. Maybe, but I think we're just at we're in the infancy turning point of all these things, but at least people are starting to be open-minded. It's going to take a while, but they are starting to be open-minded.
Yeah, it's really hard, Pat. You're so right. It's so hard to take to step back and take a bigger picture view, because we live short lives.
Yeah.
And so to be able to get a handle on species evolution and humanity as a species, I think we're probably pimply-faced 13-year-olds, or maybe 14.
Oh, you're right.
And and we rarely look at ourselves in that terms and give ourselves a break. We're really, really hard on ourselves. And I can look at religion personally, and I'm 62, and I'm only now beginning to shed that need for perfection.
To get it. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Fringe Radio Show. Our friend Cate Montana is here. Cate, again, it's been a lot of fun and learning and interesting talk this morning.
It has been.
I was thinking about your comment about kind of moving to the different sides of the boat, and sometimes I think that if we don't get our act together, it's going to kind of be like changing seats on the Titanic. I think people definitely need to take a different look at things and be more open-minded and drop some of the roles and in the old adages and take a look at things for for the betterment of themselves and humanity, and concentrate more on family and worry more about those type of things than all the physical things and the greed that's in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so unfortunate, but it seems to be the truth that we learn through difficulty. And sometimes it's not until we get a upper right to the jaw that that brings us to our knees that we go, oh my God, I need to reflect, and I need to see what's really valuable in my life. And when I often reflect and go, well, am I on my deathbed? Am I going to lie there and go, oh my God, I should have made that. I should have made that last sales call. It's just like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
But taking that kind of perspective, it takes you have to backpedal to even go there. Something has to make you stop, and that's which brings me right back to the beginning of the show, is that the whole thing about the women telling the men to stop, or even the concept of stopping, is like, wow, I didn't know how to stop, Pat. I hadn't been taught how to stop. I hadn't been taught that stopping was valuable. I was taught that stopping was equivalent of death.
Yeah. No, well, it's an awakening for sure. Now, is there going to be a follow-up book to what you've got right now?
To Unearthing Venus? Yes. Yes, I am. I'm in the process of working on another book called Unearthing Shadows. And the follow-up to this book is actually taking a dip into fundamentalist Christianity, because in my own life, I've gone, after I had that whole conversation with shaman, I ended up going to South America and working with shamans in South America, down in Peru and in Ecuador, and working with shamans doing medicine ceremonies with ayahuasca. And it took me into some very dark places in my genetics, in my body, in my DNA. I was on these journeys in these ceremonies. I was awakened to a very deep program of pain and worthlessness, and of such a despairing degree, Pat, that I couldn't imagine that I was walking around with that level of despair locked into the cells of my body and in my soul, and still even function. But what I became aware of is that we all, every single human being on this planet, especially those of us in the West, carry this burden of pain and worthlessness and insecurity about ourselves as beings, and that's part of what drives us so mercilessly to accomplish things and to do and to have stuff, is to fill that aching void in ourselves that, for the most part, religion has brought us to. So much of the tribal cultures, and I hate, and one is not better than the other, but the early goddess religions were much more experientially based. There was always this sense that the divine is within and it's accessible through our own searching. It's our own nature. We are, quantum physics is showing that we are all at a fundamental level, at the quantum level, at the level of the Planck scale, which is a level of just pure information. We are all joined and are one being.
Right.
With individualized perspective and consciousness. How amazing is that? That's the multiplicity and yet still being one. How extraordinary. And so finding that place of divinity, of expansion, of joy, of ecstasy, of that amazing place of the life force is in us, but I think we have been rigidly schooled and trained and entrained and programmed to think very, very poorly of ourselves. And we're living up to our own expectations. And And I was really, really shocked to find such a core of darkness in my own being, not as a human being. You know, a lot of the fundamentalist religions, you know, the whole premise is that we are dark, worthless, evil beings at our very core, and that's such Tommy rot. But you know, you say something long enough, and you begin to believe it.
Right. And what it's, well, not what it sounds like, what's happened in your situation is you experienced that, had the awakening, and now you've made your changes. You've your book is about your adventure, if you want to call it that. But I mean, you've made the change. You've realized it, didn't get self-absorbed in it, and moved on with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Unearthing Venus is about unearthing that other part of ourselves that we have kind of put aside in our intoxication with our intellect, which has been what a ride. I mean, look, we're on radio. We're doing this amazing dance together, you in Utah and me in the Pacific Northwest, because of left brain function and intelligence and technology. How brilliant and divine is that?
Right.
But we just can't afford to throw the baby out with the bathwater and not appreciate the heart and the soul of us and our community and our love for one another as family, whether it's just the nuclear family or whether it's the community family or the larger family between nations. It's like we can't afford to set that aside, or we're going to end up in a very unfortunate kind of Darth Vader reality in the future that none of us want to see.
Well, and I think too, Cate, we've kind of as humans, we've gone through something pretty horrific, and I've said this so many times, but you know, I mean, we went through, we're still in a heck of an economic crisis. People's lives have been changed. I know mine was. You know, people lost businesses, they lost jobs. There's still, as much as sometimes we think things are all good, there's still 94 million people in America alone out of work, which may never be employed again. And these weren't people that were sitting there collecting a welfare check. These are people that just are plain out of work. Companies have closed, businesses have closed, they've downsized. You know, we've gone through some pretty horrific things. I mean, we've been tested pretty hard. But I still think, in general, no matter how hard we've been tested, I think a lot of people are now sitting back and saying, you know what, maybe I don't have that big fancy house anymore. I'm not driving the newest cars anymore. But family is more important. We made it through. We're not living under a bridge. And some people are living under a bridge, but you know what? They're okay with it because they've got their families there. And I think families and relationships have changed quite a bit. People are, I've seen kind of a huge change. Is it all good at the end of the day overall? No, it's not. But I think what it is good is that people have kind of gone back to that family value, and that doesn't mean you and the wife or you and the girlfriend and the 5 kids. Right. It's just that, you know what I mean? That bond is starting to come back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's true that in the most desperate of times we rise to, to a higher level of what our potential is about, and you can't. Business and the corporatocracy would have us believe that profit is ever expanding, but we live in a world of limited resources. Our soul and our spirit and potential are not limited, but we live in a finite physical world. And, it's fascinating to me that, the whole corporate idea of endless profit and growth is mirrored by, isn't it interesting that we now live in a basically a cancer-based society, which is out of control growth.
Yeah.
And so I think what we're seeing in our economic condition is this much needed contraction that is just like that's a red flag waving. Wait a minute, you cannot have endless, unlimited growth. It's unnatural. It's cancerous. It's deadly.
Right.
So as painful as it is to alter course, change does not come to the human being easily, I don't think.
No, it doesn't.
Most of this.
No, as
But,
humans, we don't.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think in the long run, as painful as it is, I think this is a very, very much needed course correction we're going through as a society.
Well, and the thing is, I think it'll make a lot of people stronger at the end of the day. It kind of, our values change a little bit.
They have to.
They have to, because you have no choice. Or you can fight it and sit there and be depressed about it and, crawl in the corner and rot away until you die. And I think people have already done that. And there's a lot of people that are just going to say, hey, I'm going to step up. And I think the really strong men and women, the ones that really want it, they'll get back on top again. They'll slowly climb up. And I think there's a lot of people that are very accepting to be where they're at and, just happy with it. The less is more, philosophy. Cate,
that whole idea about what's on top and what's on bottom. Boy, when we finally can get to a place where we all really can just be at par with one another, what a glorious moment that'll be.
Without a doubt. We've got to wrap it up. I mean, the 2 hours went way too quick. Love to get you back and talk more about these subjects. Where can our listeners get, where can they get your books?
They can get my book, Unearthing Venus, My Search for the Woman Within, is on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, any bookstore, and my website is www.unearthingvenus.com.
Sounds good. What do you got coming up? Anything on the short-term horizon?
Oh, God, I've got actually a movie script that I've been working on that's starting to go into production, but mostly I'm working on this next book, Unearthing Shadows.
Oh, very good. It sounds like that, without a doubt, is your passion.
It certainly is.
Well, I want to thank you for being here. Let's stay in touch and get you back on again, because you've got some other books that are so interesting. I wanted to kind of touch on them a little bit, but we talked about these great subjects, and again, hopefully people being open-minded will give a little bit of thought. But let's stay in touch and get you back on down the road and talk more.
I would love that, Pat. I would love that.
Thank you so much for giving up your night and being here with us. It was an honor to have you here, Cate.
Thank you. And say hi to Carol for me.
I sure will. She will be here next time for sure.
Wonderful. All right.
Take care.
Have a great night, what's left of it.
You too. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.